My name is Hermione Russell. I'm a pediatric nurse living in a quiet suburb of Ohio, 38 years old, married to Lucas, and mother to our spirited 9-year-old son, Ethan. Every day, I wake up early, long before the sun peaks over the horizon, to prepare for my 12-hour shifts at the Children's Hospital. Nursing isn't just a job for me, it's a calling. I've been at it for over 15 years, and every day I hold tight to the knowledge that my work, though exhausting, has meaning. I'm there when scared little patients clutch my hand, when their parents weep in hushed corners, and through every tiny victory and heartbreak. But no matter how demanding work gets, I always make sure to come home to my family with an open heart and a calm spirit. Balancing my career with family life is a constant juggling act. Lucas works in IT and supports me quietly from the sidelines. He's patient and steady, the kind of partner who picks up the slack without complaints, especially when I'm running late or too tired to cook dinner. But even with Lucas's support, my days often blur into one another. Hospital shifts, school car rides, grocery runs, baths, bedtime stories, and the endless minutia of keeping a household running. I'm the one who makes sure Ethan's homework is done, his lunch packed, and his favorite pajamas washed and ready. I'm the keeper of family routines and traditions, the person who ties all the pieces together. Family traditions are what I hold on to most tightly. Despite the stress and sometimes thorny dynamics, I believe in family, its messy beauty, its imperfect love. I cherish the small celebrations, the birthday parties, the Sunday dinners, the holidays. To me, those moments aren't just events on a calendar. They're bridges connecting generations, fragile threads weaving shared memories. I know how important it is for Ethan to feel rooted, to grow up surrounded by people who love and support him. So, I pour my heart into keeping those traditions alive, even when it feels like I'm the only one trying. Recently, I planned Ethan's 9th birthday party with that same hope. I spent weeks preparing, organizing a small backyard gathering with balloons, streamers, and games. Ethan chose a superhero theme, his favorite, and I found a cake decorated with bright blue and red icing to match. I invited family members well in advance and sent reminders, hoping to see smiling faces there to celebrate my son's special day. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, made sure the food was perfect, and even stayed up late the night before to wrap presents. Everything was arranged with care, with love. But when the day came, nobody from my family showed up. Not my father, not my brother, not a single relative. The house was full of guests, Ethan's friends from school, neighbors, and a few of my closest friends, but the absence of my own blood felt like an invisible weight pressing down on the air. The balloons hung limp, the cake sat untouched longer than it should have, and Ethan's bright smile flickered with confusion as he asked, "Why didn't Grandma or Uncle David come, Mom?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, plastered on a smile, and told him they were busy with other things. I didn't want to shatter his joy. Later that night, after the guests left and Ethan was tucked into bed, I sat alone in the quiet house. The empty chairs at the table seemed to mock me. I wondered if I had done something wrong, or if my family simply didn't care to be part of my son's life. The silence was sharp, a painful reminder that the people who should have been there chose not to come. Still, I held on to a fragile hope, convincing myself it was just a one-time thing, that they had their reasons, that maybe next time would be different. I wanted to believe in my family's love, even if it felt distant. Then, just days later, my phone buzzed with a message from my father. It wasn't a kind word or an apology for missing Ethan's birthday. Instead, it was a demand, a blunt request for $1,800 to help pay for my brother's upcoming engagement party. No mention of Ethan's celebration, no acknowledgement of my efforts or hurt feelings. The message felt like a slap in the face, a clear sign that respect and consideration were one-way streets in this family. That moment shook me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about being taken for granted, invisible, expected to give without receiving. I read the message aloud to Lucas, who looked at me with quiet concern. I felt a storm of emotions swirling inside. Hurt, anger, confusion. But beneath it all, a seed of resolve began to take root. I realized then that I was standing at a crossroads, one that would force me to rethink what family truly means and how much I was willing to sacrifice for their approval. And so, here I am, trying to navigate this messy, painful path, holding on to my love for Ethan and Lucas, and wondering how to protect the ones I care about most, when the people who should have been there for us chose not to be. I've spent countless hours reflecting on how things came to this point, how the people who are supposed to be my family, the ones who should know me best, ended up sidelining me so completely. It's almost like a script I've read before, one that's been playing out since I was a kid. From the very beginning, my relationship with my father, George, and my brother, David, was marked by a clear divide. David was the golden boy, favored, protected, and rewarded for almost everything he did. Me? I was the shadow, expected to be quiet, to keep the peace, and never quite measuring up to their expectations. I remember growing up in that old, creaky house in Ohio, where every family achievement was quietly cataloged, and every failure was magnified. David was the kid who brought home trophies, who got praised for his grades and his athletic accomplishments. He was charming and confident, the one who could do no wrong in George's eyes. I, on the other hand, was often met with cold indifference or worse, criticism. If something went wrong, or if I struggled, the blame fell squarely on me. It wasn't always loud or aggressive. It was subtle, like a chill in the air when I entered the room or a dismissive glance that said I wasn't worth their time. Family holidays were some of the hardest times. While David and his friends were showered with attention and gifts, I often found myself on the edges of gatherings, a bystander rather than a participant. Invitations would arrive late or not at all, or I'd overhear plans that didn't include me. It wasn't just the physical absence, it was the feeling of being deliberately forgotten, erased from the memory of the family. I learned early on to put up walls, to swallow the loneliness and pretend it didn't hurt. I told myself, maybe they're just busy, or maybe it's not personal, but deep down I knew better. There were moments I tried to bridge the gap. Calls, visits, small gestures to show I cared. I'd bake cookies, send cards, offer to help with family events. Sometimes I even sacrificed opportunities, turning down job offers or shifts to be available for family emergencies. But those efforts were met with little acknowledgement. When David needed money, I was the one to lend it without hesitation, even if it meant scrimping on our own bills. When George needed help with paperwork or fixing things around the house, I was there, quietly taking on burdens while they took my kindness for granted. It wasn't just the financial strain, though that was significant. It was the emotional neglect that cut the deepest. I craved simple things. A call just to ask how I was, a genuine interest in my life or Ethan's, an invitation to share in their joys and milestones. Instead, I got indifference or, worse, subtle rebukes. When I tried to voice my feelings, I was often met with defensiveness or accusations that I was being overly sensitive. It was clear that the family dynamic was set up in a way that kept me on the outside looking in, a role I was expected to accept without complaint. What hurt most was watching how differently George and David treated others. David's friends and fiancé were welcomed and celebrated, while my presence was barely tolerated. George, the patriarch, seemed to reserve his approval for David alone, using favoritism as a currency to maintain control. This imbalance poisoned every interaction, leaving me feeling like an outsider in my own family. I carried this weight silently for years, hoping that love would eventually break through the walls of neglect. Looking back, it's clear how much I internalized these patterns, how they shaped my sense of self and my boundaries. I wanted to believe that family meant unconditional support, that my sacrifices would be recognized, that the love I gave so freely would be returned. But despite all my efforts, the message I received was unmistakable. For George and David, family was about power, control, and selective affection. This realization is painful, but also empowering. It explains the emptiness I felt sitting alone at Ethan's birthday party, the hollow ache of watching my son's special day overlooked. Understanding the roots of this dysfunction doesn't erase the hurt, but it helps me see the situation with clearer eyes. It forces me to confront the truth that the family I dreamed of being part of has never truly embraced me. and that knowledge will guide the difficult choices I have to make moving forward. Over the years, my role in the family became less about sharing affection and more about being the safety net, the silent provider, and the caretaker who kept things from falling apart. It wasn't something I volunteered for lightly. It was born out of necessity and a deep-seated hope that my contributions would eventually be valued, that my sacrifices would earn me a place at the table, not just physically, but emotionally. From early on, whenever there was a family emergency, whether it was a sudden car repair, a medical bill, or bills threatening to pile up, I was the one who quietly stepped in to help. I remember more than a few occasions when David's expenses came before our own, when I dipped into savings meant for Ethan's future to cover yet another unexpected, urgent need from my brother or father. It was never about the money itself, but about keeping the peace, about ensuring that no crisis spiraled beyond control. I convinced myself that helping David was just what family did. I told myself that someday, when the roles reversed, they would be there for me. But that day never came. I also became the primary caregiver for our aging grandmother, after Grandma Rose fell ill. While David made excuses about being too busy with work, or conveniently forgot appointments, I rearranged my shifts whenever possible to take her to doctor visits, manage her medications, and keep the house tidy. Lucas supported me quietly, understanding how much this meant to me, but carrying the added burden on his shoulders in ways no one else seemed to notice. Sometimes, after long hospital shifts and exhausted days, I'd come home to Grandma's worried eyes, and the weight in my chest felt heavier knowing that David wasn't there. Repeatedly, I put David's needs ahead of my own ambitions. Several times, I declined job opportunities that required more travel or different hours, simply so I could be available to help with family matters. It wasn't just financial or caregiving support. I was often the mediator, smoothing over conflicts, absorbing tension, and making sure gatherings stayed peaceful. Even when I was the one feeling hurt or excluded, I coordinated family celebrations, organized holiday meals, sent out invitations, and even took on the mental load of remembering birthdays and anniversaries, all silently, all without expectation of thanks. And yet, despite all this, my efforts barely registered. David seemed to take my generosity for granted, his requests for money and favors increasingly frequent and urgent. I'd lend him hundreds or even thousands without hesitation, only to be met with vague promises of repayment that never materialized. When I asked for a little understanding or support in return, the response was often frustration or dismissal, as if I were the one being unreasonable. The financial strain was real and sometimes overwhelming. I learned to budget with razor-thin margins, juggling medical bills, groceries, Ethan's school expenses, and the occasional emergency, all while under the quiet pressure of these family obligations. Every dollar I gave away was a dollar not saved, not invested, not put toward my family's future. Yet I kept giving, telling myself that this was what a good sister, a good daughter, a good mother did. There were moments when I questioned my choices. I'd lie awake at night wondering if my sacrifices were ever truly appreciated, or if I was just being used. I tried talking to Lucas about it, hoping he might understand the frustration simmering beneath my calm exterior. He'd listen patiently, reminding me of my strength and the importance of boundaries. But even his gentle support sometimes couldn't quiet the gnawing doubt. Still, I clung to the hope that love and generosity would soften the edges of my family's coldness. I believed that if I showed enough kindness, kept giving without complaint, they would eventually notice, would acknowledge the weight I bore silently for all of us. Maybe then, the dynamic would shift, and I would no longer be the invisible one. Maybe, just maybe, my family would start to see me, not as a resource to tap into, but as a person worth cherishing. That hope, fragile as it was, kept me going through the years of imbalance and quiet pain. But deep down, I began to sense the truth beneath the surface. The more I gave, the more I was expected to give, and the less I was seen. It was a cycle of exploitation disguised as family loyalty, and I was caught in its web, trying to untangle myself without breaking the fragile threads that still connected us. Looking back now, I see just how much I sacrificed, Not just time and money, but pieces of my own peace and dignity. I carried the family's burdens quietly, hoping my love would be enough to hold us together. But love, I learned, isn't supposed to cost you your worth. And that realization marked the beginning of a difficult awakening. The day of Ethan's birthday party arrived with a strange mixture of excitement and unease swirling inside me. For weeks, I'd poured every ounce of energy into making it perfect. The superhero decorations, the carefully chosen cake, the games and favors. Ethan had been buzzing with anticipation, his eyes bright as he imagined the fun he'd have surrounded by family and friends. There was so much joy wrapped up in that hope. I wanted so badly for him to feel loved and celebrated by everyone important in his life. But as the afternoon sun climbed higher, the house began to fill with the cheerful noise of children laughing, parents chatting over cups of coffee, and the scent of freshly baked treats drifting through the air. Yet, something gnawed at me. The empty seats around the table reserved for my family. My father, George, my brother David, even a few extended relatives, they were nowhere to be seen. I kept glancing at the door, hoping they would walk in, hear Ethan's laughter, and join the celebration. But the door stayed closed. I told myself again and again, maybe they're stuck in traffic, or they had something urgent come up. I put on a smile for Ethan, tried to keep the party lively, and made sure he didn't catch the shadow creeping over me. His innocent question, quiet but piercing, cut through my heart. "Mom, why didn't Grandma or Uncle David come?" I forced my smile wider and replied softly, "They're busy today, sweetheart, but we still have lots of fun friends here." His smile faltered slightly, but he nodded, trusting me. The party carried on, but for me, it felt hollow. I noticed the limpness of the balloons, the untouched cake sitting on the table longer than it should have, the quiet spaces where laughter should have been louder, especially coming from those I considered family. The house was full, yes, but the absence of my own blood family members left the air thick with unspoken disappointment. Later that evening, when the last of the guests had drifted away and Ethan was tucked into bed, the quiet around me felt unbearable. I sat in the living room, the weight of the empty chairs at the dining table pressing down like a silent accusation. The faint glow of birthday candles left flickering shadows on the walls, but no one was there to see them. No one but me. Memories flooded in. The times I'd tried to bridge the growing gap. The celebrations I'd organized where I was the only one showing up on the other side. I thought about how I'd always tried to give my family the benefit of the doubt, telling myself they had reasons beyond my understanding. But tonight, the silence was deafening, and hope felt fragile. When I finally found the courage to call my father the next day, my voice carried a hesitant strength. "Dad, Ethan's birthday party. We missed you today. Was something wrong?" There was a pause, a sigh, and then his dismissal. "You know how busy we've been. Besides, Ethan isn't like David's kids. They've got their own way of doing things." His words stung sharper than I expected, the comparison sinking deep. It wasn't just that they hadn't come. It was the message that Ethan didn't measure up. I closed the call feeling small and unseen, clutching the phone like a lifeline that had slipped away. Lucas noticed the change immediately. "What happened?" he asked gently, wrapping an arm around me as I leaned into his steady presence. I shook my head, trying to hold back tears. They just didn't care to be there. And when I asked, Dad made it sound like Ethan wasn't important enough. At work, I tried to focus on the steady rhythm of my shifts, the beeping monitors, the soft cries of children, the whispered reassurances to scared parents. But some of my colleagues noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way my smile didn't quite reach them anymore. "Everything okay?" one nurse asked kindly during a brief break. I forced a nod, but inside I was unraveling. The absence of my family's support felt like a public wound, one invisible to most, but raw and exposed to me. The people who should have lifted me up on this day, the day I celebrated my son, had let me down without explanation. And despite the ache, I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself they had other priorities, that this wasn't the end of the story. But the truth was settling in, heavy and relentless. I was alone in wanting this family to be something more. The empty chairs at Ethan's birthday party were a silent testament to the distance growing between us, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend that didn't hurt. Days after Ethan's birthday party, when the sting of that quiet, empty house still lingered like a dull ache in my chest, my phone buzzed with a new message. I wasn't expecting anything from my father. After all, the only contact we'd had since the party was a brief, cold exchange that left me feeling smaller than ever. But when I saw his name flash on my screen, a pit of apprehension settled deep in my stomach. I unlocked the phone and opened the text. It was short, direct, and shockingly transactional. "Hermione, we need $1,800 for David's engagement party. Please send it ASAP." No greeting, no softening words, no mention of Ethan's birthday, no apology for missing it, no acknowledgement of the silence that had stretched between us like a chasm, just a demand. The words felt like a slap, raw and unyielding. I sat back on the edge of the couch, the glow of the phone harsh in the dim living room. The quiet hum of our suburban neighborhood seeped through the windows, distant lawnmowers, the occasional bark of a dog, the faint rustle of leaves. But inside, my world felt suddenly claustrophobic, heavy with disbelief. I read the words again, as if maybe this time the message would soften, the tone would change. But no, it was cold, pragmatic, pay up or be considered uncooperative. Lucas walked in quietly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere before I even spoke. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and weariness. I showed him the screen, watching his brow furrow as he read the message aloud, the weight of it sinking in between us. 1-800? For an engagement party? And this just days after Ethan's birthday? Did he say anything else? He asked, already knowing the answer. No, nothing. Not a word about Ethan or the party. Just this. My voice cracked, the frustration bubbling beneath years of bottled-up hurt spilling into the room. I felt the familiar knot tighten in my throat, the ache of being invisible when it mattered most. Lucas pulled me into a hug, steady and protective. "You've done so much for them, Hermione. You don't owe them this." But that was just it. I did owe. Or at least, they expected I did. Because this family had always operated on a currency of taking without giving. I swallowed hard, trying to hold on to composure. But the unfairness stung like salt on an old wound. It was more than money. It was the principle, the message behind the demand. They wanted me to pay for the celebration of the brother who never bothered to show up for my son's birthday. I thought back to the party, the empty seats, the silent invitations, Ethan's hopeful eyes searching the door. And now, they wanted me to bankroll David's big moment, as if none of it mattered. As if the love and loyalty I'd poured silently into their lives was invisible. I sat with the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of 1,000 small betrayals piling up all at once. The year-long pattern of neglect, the financial strain, the emotional exhaustion, it all crystallized in that single message. It was a line drawn in the sand. Their affection was conditional, transactional, and painfully selective. The quiet in the room was broken by Ethan's footsteps padding down the hallway, his voice soft and innocent. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, blinking sleep from his eyes. I forced a smile, hugging him close. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. That's all." But inside, I was stirred awake by a burning clarity. This wasn't just about a party or some money. It was about respect, about boundaries, about finally recognizing the truth I'd been afraid to admit. The family I wanted so badly to include us had no intention of truly being there. I read the message aloud once more, the bitterness heavy on my tongue. "Send $1-800 for David's party," I said slowly, letting the words hang in the air. No apology, no mention of Ethan's birthday, no sign that they care. Lucas tightened his grip. "What will you do?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, my resolve hardening. I'm done waiting for them to come around. It's time to stop giving when no one's willing to give back. That night, as the house settled into quiet, I sat with the message glowing on my phone, a symbol of everything broken in this family. The demand was more than a request. It was a challenge, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to meet it on my own terms. That night, After tucking Ethan into bed and sharing a quiet moment with Lucas, sleep refused to come. Instead, I found myself trapped in a loop of memories and emotions, each thought sharper than the last. The shadows in the living room seemed to stretch longer, mirroring the heavy weight settling in my chest. I sat cross-legged on the sofa, phone still in hand, the harsh glow of the screen casting flickering light across the room. The words from my father's message, so cold, so transactional, kept echoing in my mind. $1,800 for David's engagement party. Please send it ASAP. No please. No thank you. No acknowledgement of Ethan's birthday. No remorse for the emptiness of those chairs at our party. I closed my eyes and let the past wash over me, a wave I'd tried so hard to keep at bay. Years of unbalanced give and take, of silent sacrifices, all threading together into a tapestry of neglect. I recalled the countless times I'd stepped up to patch holes in the family's foundation while receiving nothing but neglect in return. The late nights nursing Grandma Rose through her illness, the money lent to David without so much as a thank you, the calls ignored or brushed aside when I needed support. I remembered the sting of holidays where my presence was barely tolerated, and the invisible barrier my father and brother had erected between me and the family's heart. Each memory felt like a stone added to the pile on my chest, a grief unlike any I'd known, not the sharp, sudden grief of loss, but a slow, grinding ache born from years of being unseen and unvalued, the kind of grief that seeps into your bones, making you question your worth, your place in the world. I felt a deep sadness for Ethan, too, a boy who deserved to be surrounded by love from every corner of his family, but who instead bore the silent weight of their absence. How many more times would his birthdays come and go without the warmth of grandparents or uncles? How many more moments would be stolen from us by their indifference? But grief, as heavy as it was, began to mutate in me. It stirred a fire, a simmering anger that wouldn't be extinguished by tears or silence. I thought of the message again, the demand for money, completely disconnected from any real family feeling. It wasn't just about the sum, it was the principle behind it. The assumption that I would pay, unquestioningly, after being ignored and dismissed. The expectation that my generosity was endless, while their respect was conditional or non-existent. That anger burned through the sadness, lighting a path out of the fog. For so long, I had been the family's safety net, the quiet giver who absorbed their needs without protest. I had believed that kindness and sacrifice were the currency of love, but now I saw the truth. My kindness had been mistaken for weakness, my sacrifices for obligations to exploit. The more I gave, the more they took, not out of gratitude, but entitlement. The affection I craved was transactional, doled out only when it served their interests. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. They will never appreciate me or my son. Not truly. Not in the way a family should. Not with open hearts and genuine respect. That cold clarity settled deep within, a seed of resolve growing in the fertile soil of all my disappointment and pain. I could no longer feed this unbalanced dynamic. I owed it to myself, to Lucas, and most of all to Ethan, to draw a line. I sat upright, the night air cool against my skin through the slightly cracked window. In the silence, I made a decision. I would stop waiting for their approval, their acknowledgement, their love that only came with strings attached. I would protect my own family, shield them from this cycle of neglect and exploitation. The time had come to reclaim my dignity, to demand respect, not out loud in anger or desperation, but with quiet, unyielding strength. But even as this determination solidified, I knew it wouldn't be easy. This awakening was the first step on a path fraught with uncertainty. Choosing boundaries meant facing potential backlash, loneliness, and confrontation. It meant breaking patterns that had been entrenched for decades. Yet, it also meant hope. A hope that by prioritizing those who truly loved us, we could build something stronger, healthier. For now, the night stretched on, still and deep, carrying with it the weight of all I'd lost and the promise of what I was about to gain. And as dawn began its slow crawl over the horizon, I felt, for the first time in a long time, a flicker of peace settle beneath the storm inside me. The next morning, As sunlight filtered softly through the kitchen window, I sat at the table with a pen and a notebook in front of me. The air smelled faintly of freshly brewed coffee, a small comfort in the storm of my thoughts. I knew I couldn't move forward without a clear picture of how deeply entwined I'd become in this family's web, and exactly what they expected from me. The financial demand from Dad had been a harsh wake-up call, but it was also a catalyst. It forced me to map out the invisible threads of dependence and obligation that had quietly stretched across every corner of my life. I started by listing everything I'd been managing that wasn't just about caring for Ethan and Lucas. It was a long list: paying household bills for my father's property, covering unexpected medical expenses for Grandma Rose, loaning money to David for his mounting debts, even footing the bill for family gatherings because no one else ever stepped up. These weren't one-off favors. They were ongoing commitments. I jotted down each expense, the dates, the amounts, and the reason. The act of writing them down sharpening my perception like a light cutting through fog. Next, I cataloged my emotional work. The countless phone calls I'd taken to smooth over family fights, the texts I'd sent to remind relatives about birthdays and anniversaries, the dinners I'd organized that somehow only I seemed to care about. The weight of these responsibilities was crushing, yet I had shouldered them silently for years, believing this was what family meant. But now, the truth was undeniable. I was the family's unpaid coordinator, its emotional janitor, and its bank rolled into one. The more I laid it all out, the clearer it became how one-sided this relationship had been. My support had been a safety net, catching them when they stumbled and letting me fall through the cracks. I realized that without my quiet labor, many things would have crumbled. Bills left unpaid, appointments missed, conflicts left unresolved. And yet, there had never been a reciprocal effort to acknowledge or share this burden. No offers to help, or even simple expressions of gratitude. That's when I knew I had to act, not from a place of anger, but from a place of self-preservation. I couldn't keep being the family's invisible foundation, constantly eroding my own peace and resources. But I needed to do more than just stop. I needed to protect what was mine, my finances, my time, my emotional energy, and ensure that my immediate family wasn't collateral damage in this ongoing cycle. With that resolve, I reached out to a trusted attorney I'd met years ago through work. She was discreet, professional, and someone I could confide in without judgment. On the phone, I explained the situation carefully, omitting names but outlining the pattern of financial exploitation and emotional neglect. She listened thoughtfully, then advised me to update my legal documents, wills, power of attorney, bank account access, and suggested putting safeguards in place to prevent unauthorized withdrawals or financial manipulation. She also recommended documenting everything moving forward, saving text messages, emails, receipts, and keeping a detailed journal of interactions. This wasn't about preparing for a confrontation I hoped to avoid, but about protecting myself and my family from further harm. I felt a strange relief hearing her words, as if taking these steps was reclaiming control over a narrative that had long felt out of my hands. After the call, I began compiling files on my computer, a digital archive of financial transactions, family communications, and even notes about emotional interactions. I created folders labeled financial support, family events, and communication logs. Each saved message, each scanned receipt, was a small act of empowerment. I no longer wanted to be at their mercy. Alongside the paperwork, I quietly changed passwords on joint accounts and family shared services. I set up alerts on my bank accounts to notify me of any unusual activity. I even installed a smart lock on the front door, a subtle but significant boundary that symbolized the new chapter I was opening. The lock was more than a security measure. It was a statement that my home was no longer an open invitation for endless demands and disrespect. Throughout this process, I maintained my calm exterior. To Lucas, I shared plans and sought his advice, drawing strength from his steady support. To others, I continued to be polite and composed, careful not to reveal the depth of my resolve or the strategic nature of my actions. The family had no idea that beneath the surface, I was quietly tightening the reins, preparing for whatever came next. In the solitude of these moments, I felt a strange juxtaposition. grief for all I had lost in this family dynamic, but also a growing sense of empowerment. Mapping out the ways I'd been taken for granted was painful, but it was also the first step in reclaiming my life. I was no longer willing to let my love be mistaken for weakness, or my generosity for obligation. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. Ready to turn the page, ready to redefine what family meant for me and for Ethan. And in that quiet morning light, as my pen traced firm lines across the page, I made a silent vow to protect my heart and my home from those who had never truly seen us. The days following my quiet, resolute planning passed in a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. I found myself instinctively pulling back from the constant calls and messages that once demanded my immediate attention. My phone, which had always been a lifeline to the family's endless needs, began to feel heavier in my hand. The familiar buzz or ring no longer sparked a sense of urgency. It was more like a weight, a reminder of all the giving with little in return. I started letting calls from my father and brother go to voicemail, answering only when I felt calm and prepared, rather than anxious and obliged. It wasn't easy at first. The impulse to pick up immediately, to soothe tensions, to say yes to every request, was ingrained. But each unanswered call felt like a small act of reclaiming my space, a subtle but necessary boundary. When I finally listened to the messages, I was no longer the frantic, overwhelmed woman eager to placate. Instead, I was deliberate, evaluating the tone and content with fresh detachment. Some requests were predictable. David asking for money again, George wanting me to coordinate yet another family gathering. But this time, I declined. "No, I can't help with that right now," I said softly but firmly when David called about a last-minute expense. My voice, steady and calm, surprised even me. No justification, no apology, just a clear boundary. At first, there was a pause on the other end, an almost imperceptible hesitation, before the usual excuses or guilt trips would surface. But I didn't waver. I kept my responses brief and focused, refusing to get drawn into the well-worn cycle of obligation and manipulation. I also stopped managing the events that had always fallen on my shoulders. The family birthday dinners, the holiday invitations, even David's engagement party plans. Things I once coordinated tirelessly. Juggling dates, venues, and guest lists were no longer my responsibility. I informed George politely but firmly, "I won't be organizing the engagement celebration. You'll need to find someone else." There was surprise, maybe even a flicker of frustration. But I didn't back down. I was tired of being the invisible but indispensable thread that held the family tapestry together while being ignored and disrespected. At home, Lucas noticed the change too. He supported me quietly, respecting my decision to step back, though he knew it wasn't easy for someone like me, who valued harmony above all. "It's okay to say no," he reminded me gently one evening as we sat on the couch, Ethan asleep upstairs. "You don't have to carry their burdens anymore." His words were a balm in the storm, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. One of the most tangible shifts I made was changing the locks on our front door, a symbolic but practical act. For years, our home had been an open door to family demands, a place where boundaries blurred and my exhaustion deepened. Installing the new lock was a quiet declaration. This space, our space, was no longer available for endless intrusion. The locksmith's tools clicked and clacked, the new lock fitting snugly, sealing off old patterns. I kept a key for George and David for now, but the balance of control had shifted. This small change gave me a surge of power, a physical representation of my emotional boundaries. As I navigated these steps, I was careful to maintain a calm and polite demeanor during the rare interactions I had with my family. I didn't want to provoke unnecessary conflict or give away the strength simmering beneath my composed surface. To outsiders, I remained the dependable sister and daughter. Inside, I was quietly reclaiming my autonomy. Of course, the family noticed. My father's calls became more frequent at first, tinged with frustration. "We need to talk," he'd say. Or, "You're being difficult." My brother's messages veered from pleading to passive-aggressive, sometimes accusing me of abandoning them when I simply refused to participate in their financial schemes or emotional manipulation. But I held my ground, using concise responses that neither invited argument nor offered room for exploitation. Even extended relatives began to murmur, sensing the shift, but unsure how to approach me. Invitations that once came with expectation now carried a hint of awkwardness. The subtle complaints and thinly veiled jabs at my withdrawal reached my ears, but I chose to focus on the calm inside my home, the laughter of Ethan, the steady presence of Lucas, the peace of boundaries finally drawn. This was not a retreat born of anger, though anger was part of it. It was a strategy, a reclaiming of my time, my energy, and my finances. It was a statement that I would no longer be the family's invisible bank, their unpaid event planner, or the emotional caretaker who bore their burdens silently. I was teaching them that respect and effort must be mutual. The path ahead was uncertain, and I knew this new distance might cause friction. But for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Hope that by stepping back and enforcing these boundaries, I could protect my family from the cycles that had caused so much pain. The locked door at our entrance wasn't just a barrier. It was a gateway to a new chapter, one where I would no longer be invisible, and where my son's happiness could finally come first. The moment I reached my breaking point, I knew I had to act deliberately. No theatrics, no rash words, just a clear, unambiguous message that the cycle had to stop. The constant financial drain, the emotional neglect, the endless one-sided demands, they all had to be met with firm boundaries. So, after consulting with my attorney and reviewing all the documentation I had compiled, the receipts, the text messages, the unanswered calls, I took a step that felt both terrifying and liberating. I drafted a payment to George and David, not the $1,300 they demanded, not even a fraction of it, but a single, symbolic dollar. Along with it, I sent a message that was simple, yet loaded with meaning. Best wishes. 2 small words that spoke volumes. No promises, no excuses, no entanglements. It was my way of saying, I see your demand, but I refuse to be your ATM or your emotional dumping ground any longer. The text accompanying the payment was calm, stripped of the anger that churned inside me. I wanted to be unambiguous without being cruel. I wrote, I hope the engagement celebration is joyful. This is all I am sending at this time, as I must prioritize my immediate family's well-being. It was a firm line drawn in the sand, a boundary that I hoped they would understand, though I doubted it. While sending that symbolic payment and message, I felt an unexpected mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief because I was finally standing up for myself, for Ethan, and for Lucas, the people who truly mattered. Apprehension because I knew this move would shake the family tree, disturb the delicate balance that had allowed their entitlement to thrive. But it was necessary. The time for silent suffering had passed. In the days that followed, I made sure my lawyer was fully informed of the situation. I asked her to update my will and other legal documents, explicitly excluding George and David from any financial benefit. It was a painful but necessary step. I wanted to protect what little security Lucas, Ethan, and I had built against the possibility of future exploitation. She assured me the changes were straightforward and confidential, and that I was making the right choices for my family's future. I also reached out privately to David's fiancé. I had hesitated at first, wondering if dragging her into this drama would be fair. But ultimately, I felt she deserved to know the truth about the family dynamics. I told her gently about the pattern of neglect and financial exploitation that had defined my relationship with George and David. Her initial shock gave way to understanding and gratitude. We agreed that honesty was better than hiding behind facades, especially with a wedding on the horizon. I sensed that her perspective might be a catalyst for change, or at least an ally in setting healthier boundaries. Meanwhile, I began withdrawing Ethan from any family-related events or gatherings. It was heartbreaking in a way. I wanted him to have a strong, loving network, but I couldn't expose him to the pain and disappointment I had endured. I wanted to shield his innocence and happiness as fiercely as I protected our home. Lucas supported this fully, standing beside me in quiet solidarity as we crafted a new family life centered on love, respect, and genuine connection. I also took practical steps to manage communication. I blocked George's calls temporarily, not out of spite, but to create a space where I could breathe and think without constant interruptions or guilt trips. David's messages shifted from casual requests to frustrated demands, but I remained resolute. I responded only when necessary, always with calm, measured words that reinforced my boundaries. The family's reaction was immediate and intense. The abrupt halt in financial support and involvement in their plans sent shockwaves through their carefully constructed world. Suddenly, bills went unpaid. Events stalled. The once effortless flow of resources they had taken for granted came to a grinding halt. I saw the panic creep in, texts filled with apologies, pleas, and veiled threats. But I held firm. I knew that giving in now would mean losing the ground I had just gained. In the quiet moments, my thoughts often circled back to Ethan. I wanted to protect his childhood from the fractures and disappointments I had experienced. The locked door on our home wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a symbol of the new life I was determined to build. A life where boundaries were respected, love was reciprocated, and my son's happiness was truly valued. Sending that $1 was more than just a financial statement. It was a declaration of self-respect and a turning point in the story of my family. It was the first act in a carefully measured response to years of neglect and exploitation, a step toward reclaiming the dignity that had been eroded for too long. And as I watched the message deliver, I felt a quiet strength settle within me, knowing this was only the beginning of a much-needed change. The moment I sent that single dollar, a ripple spread through the family that I hadn't fully anticipated, but had steeled myself to face. Almost immediately, the silence I'd cultivated was shattered by a flood of messages and calls, desperate attempts to plug the hole I'd left in their financial lifeline. George's texts came fast and frantic, each one dripping with a cocktail of apology and thinly veiled guilt, as if trying to mask the panic behind his carefully crafted words. "Hermione, please, can we talk? I didn't mean to upset you. David really needs this. It's important to the whole family. You know how much this engagement means to him." That last line stung the most. The whole family? Where had I been then? Where was this whole family? When Ethan's birthday party was empty, when my calls went unanswered, when my sacrifices melted into thin air. I read each text, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, tempted to fire back a scathing reply. But instead, I kept my replies measured, firm, but calm, hoping to avoid stirring more chaos than necessary. I understand the importance. Right now, I need to focus on my immediate family's needs, I typed quietly. I hope the celebration goes well. David's fiancée was another front in this unexpected storm. Her messages appeared soon after George's, more insistent, less formal, pleading in a way that felt both sincere and strained. She pressed me to reconsider, to please help make this a happy time, reminding me of what the engagement meant not just to David, but to everyone involved. She even suggested that this tension was harming the family's chances at unity and asked if we could find a way to move past this. Her words cut through the armor I was building. I wasn't naive. I knew she was caught between her fiancé's expectations and the reality of the family's fractures. Yet, I couldn't just hand over the reins again, not after all I had endured. I responded gently but firmly, explaining that respect and support must be mutual, not one-sided, that I wanted to protect Ethan from being hurt by the same patterns I had suffered. "I wish things were different," I wrote, "but right now, I have to put my son's well-being first." As the pressure mounted, extended relatives stepped in, calling and messaging with cautious attempts at mediation. Some expressed concern for the family's unity. Others tried to smooth over hurt feelings with half-hearted apologies or vague offers to talk things through. Their voices were tinged with uncertainty, as if unsure which side to take or maybe afraid to confront the underlying issues that had been festering for years. I listened to their calls, often choosing silence or gentle deflection over engagement. Lucas and I talked quietly about how to navigate these delicate waters. He reminded me that while family was important, it couldn't come at the cost of my peace or Ethan's happiness. "You're doing the right thing," he said, holding my hand in the quiet moments between their calls and texts. "Sometimes protecting your family means making hard choices." Ethan, thankfully, was shielded from much of this turmoil. Yet, even his young instincts sensed the tension that had settled like a fog over our home. On more than one occasion, I found him hesitating at the edge of a conversation or watching me with wide, concerned eyes. "Mom? Is Grandpa mad at us?" he asked softly one evening, his voice trembling just a little. I crouched down beside him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups get upset, but we're okay. I promise we're going to be okay." Behind that promise was my fierce determination to build a sanctuary for my little family, a place where love didn't come with strings attached, where respect was a given, not a bargaining chip. But even as I tried to maintain calm, I could feel the undercurrents of anger and panic swirling through the messages and calls from the rest of the Russell clan. It was as if a carefully maintained illusion had been shattered, and now they were grasping at the shards, trying to piece together what they'd taken for granted. Bills once paid without question were left unpaid. Plans stalled in limbo. The family's usual grip on resources and favors slipped through their fingers, exposing how much they had relied on my quiet compliance. And yet, through it all, I remained resolute. I didn't engage with their pleas for immediate repayment or their thinly veiled accusations that I was being selfish or ungrateful. I knew the longer I held firm, the clearer the message would become. My boundaries were real, and they were not negotiable. The community around us began to notice the shift too. Friends and neighbors, once accustomed to the Russell family's polished facade, whispered about the growing tensions. Invitations that once came without question became scarce. Social events passed without our attendance or acknowledgement. The family's carefully maintained image was cracking in subtle but visible ways. Still, in the eye of this storm, I found moments of unexpected support. Lucas stood steadfast beside me, his quiet strength a balm in the chaos. A few close friends reached out, offering understanding and encouragement without judgment. It was a reminder that true family isn't always defined by blood or tradition, but by those who stand with you when the world feels like it's unraveling. As the days passed and the initial panic subsided, the Russell family's scramble revealed something I'd known all along. A love that demanded payment wasn't love at all. My refusal to comply was more than a financial stance. It was a declaration that my family's dignity and happiness came first. But even as I held this hard line, I knew this battle was far from over. The calls would likely continue. The tensions would simmer beneath polite facades, waiting for the next crack to widen into a chasm. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I braced for what might come next. Because standing up for yourself in a family that's never truly seen you always comes with a price. The consequences of my firm stance began to ripple through the family's fragile ecosystem in ways that felt both inevitable and harsh. Almost immediately, the financial strain hit my father, George. Months of relying quietly on my support had left his resources stretched thinner than I'd fully realized. Mortgage payments for the old family home, once reliably handled with my assistance, started to slip. Notices arrived in the mail, their official tone a sharp contrast to the casual way George had always asked me to cover this one. The house that once felt like a symbol of stability was now under threat, and I could feel the weight of that reality settle in my chest. David's situation was no less precarious. His business partnerships, which I had helped manage behind the scenes, sorting invoices, handling negotiations, and smoothing over disputes, began to unravel. Without my quiet, steady hand, cracks showed quickly, calls went unanswered, meetings were missed, and trust faltered among his associates. I knew he was scrambling to fill the gaps, but the damage was clear. The empire he liked to present so confidently was vulnerable, and it was no longer propped up by my silent labor. Social invitations, once casually extended to me and Ethan, began to dry up. I noticed it first at Ethan's school, where birthday party RSVPs stopped coming, and the familiar calls from family friends dwindled. The subtle shift was painful, an unmistakable sign that the family's social circle was distancing itself, perhaps uncomfortable with the friction now openly simmering. Even casual neighborhood gatherings, where I had long been a fixture, seemed to take on an air of quiet exclusion. The unspoken message was clear. My withdrawal was unsettling the delicate balance, and not everyone was pleased. Behind the scenes, The family began trying to control the narrative. Rumors spread, whispers from extended relatives suggesting I was the one causing division, painting me as cold, selfish, even ungrateful. I heard fragments from mutual acquaintances, their words twisting my firm boundaries into acts of cruelty. But I had prepared for this. Years of being scapegoated had made me resilient. More importantly, I had the evidence. Meticulous records of texts, calls, financial transactions. When confronted with accusations, I could point to the truth etched in black and white, a contrast to the shifting stories they offered. Some relatives reached out privately, their voices softer, tinged with regret. They confessed to having sensed the imbalance, but felt powerless to intervene. Aunts and cousins expressed sorrow over the family's unraveling and offered tentative olive branches. Their words warmed me, reminding me that not everyone had been swept up in George and David's controlling grip. Yet, others doubled down, reinforcing old alliances and blaming me for the fracture. It was a painful reminder that family ties are complicated, often entangled with loyalty to tradition rather than fairness. As the dust settled in the community, the Russell family's polished image began to fade. The whispers in neighborhood gatherings, the awkward silence in church meetings, the subtle withdrawal of social support. It was as if the family's private turmoil had spilled into public view. Invitations once taken for granted slowed to a trickle, and the casual warmth we had known from neighbors and friends was replaced by polite distance. The facade they carefully maintained started to crack, revealing the fractures beneath. But amid the tension and isolation, I found unexpected strength. Lucas's steady presence became my sanctuary, a reminder that true family is built on mutual respect and unwavering support. Our close friends rallied quietly, offering encouragement without judgment or pity. Their kindness was a balm for the wounds left by my biological family's rejection. Through all this, I remained focused on protecting Ethan. His innocence was precious to me, and I refused to let the family's chaos seep into his world. I shielded him from the worst of it, answering his questions with gentle honesty, reassuring him with hugs and bedtime stories. His laughter and curiosity became the light that guided me through the storm. The unresolved tension lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder that standing up for oneself in a family that never truly sees you is a battle that doesn't end quickly. But I was no longer willing to be the invisible one, the silent victim of exploitation. I had drawn my line clearly, armed with truth and resolve. The future was uncertain, and the cost was real. But for the first time in years, I felt the power of reclaiming my dignity and redefining what family truly meant. The story was far from over, and as the echoes of this upheaval reached every corner of our lives, I braced myself for whatever came next. Because this was no longer just about money or parties. It was about the respect, love, and boundaries that every family should honor. It wasn't an easy road, but eventually, George and David came to a grudging place of acceptance, though never without resistance. The months following my firm stand had been filled with tension, arguments, and a growing distance that felt both painful and necessary. Yet, beneath that strain, a subtle shift began to take root. They realized that without genuine respect, accountability, and equal treatment, reconnecting on their terms was impossible. This wasn't a surrender born of warmth or regret. It was the cold acknowledgement that the dynamic they had long exploited was no longer available to them. One evening, after weeks of silence punctuated by terse messages and awkward phone calls, George finally reached out in a tone that was more measured than usual. "Hermione," he texted, "we need to talk. I want to make things right. For Ethan. For all of us. Can we meet?" I hesitated, sensing the weight behind those words. This was the moment I had prepared for, not to reopen old wounds or invite empty promises, but to set clear expectations and boundaries. When Lucas and I met George and David at a quiet cafe, the atmosphere was charged, but controlled. I came with a calm resolve, a careful list of the terms that would need to be met for any future relationship to be possible. "I'm listening," George began, his voice wary but serious. "I appreciate you agreeing to talk," I replied evenly. "But this has to be about respect and fairness. No more one-sided demands or neglect. Ethan deserves to be celebrated and included just like David's kids. I expect accountability for past actions. And moving forward, equal treatment. David shifted uncomfortably, his usual charm tempered by the reality he couldn't deny. I guess I didn't realize how much you carried. I'm sorry for how things have been. His words were tentative, lacking the sincerity I'd hoped for, but it was a start. I nodded, aware that rebuilding trust would take time, and only consistent actions, not just words, would heal the fractures. The conversation moved to practical matters: how to communicate without manipulation, involving Ethan in family events with genuine enthusiasm, and respecting the boundaries I had set. We agreed on no more financial requests unless they were fair and transparent, and that any support would be reciprocal and appreciated. Walking away from that meeting, I felt a cautious hope stir. It was not forgiveness granted lightly, but a recognition that real change was possible if they committed to it. For now, the locked door to our home symbolized the firm boundaries I would maintain, a reminder that respect must be earned, and that my family, Lucas and Ethan, would always come first. Lucas squeezed my hand as we left. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "For you, for Ethan, for us." And while the future remained uncertain, because family is never simple, I had reclaimed my dignity and peace. The path ahead would demand strength and vigilance, but I was ready. Because true family loyalty, I had learned, isn't given lightly. It's earned through respect, honesty, and love that never demands a price.